What you say?
Got it.
Okay, so we will call this meeting to order, a special meeting of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee on January 24th. So the first thing I'd like to do is welcome Steve Emley back. Thank you for being available to provide more information and answer any questions. So the first thing I'd like to do is invite anyone that has questions for Steve to fire away.
I have one. Steve, since utilizing existing culverts is obviously the least expensive option, I wondered if you could go over again for us what the advantages and disadvantages are to choosing that option.
Well, I'll start with the disadvantages. I think the primary disadvantages are, as we talked about last time, it really doesn't restore into a natural state where it has entire access to its stream bed. So that's probably the primary. And then a couple of secondary disadvantages is, aesthetics. If we talk about this bridge being kind of a gateway to the major trail system of the park, I mean, there's some disadvantages in terms of just aesthetics, I think. And kind of going along with the stream bed issue, there's quite a bit of sedimentation that has built up upstream of those culverts that will continue to occur just because of the restriction that those culverts place within the stream. And the advantages are purely cost driven, to be honest with you. Cost being primary, the benefit, and kind of a secondary benefit, I guess, is that it offers probably a higher capacity in terms of traffic rating than any of the other options that we talk about in terms of the bridges.
So I'm guessing that aesthetically it could be enhanced with, stones and rails or whatever. But is our main purpose to improve the flow of the stream bed? Is that our overriding purpose? And I just throw that out to Linda and other members of the committee.
Sure. I think that is one of the real goals, to return. It's a lovely stream that there's that lovely little waterfall right there. And if returning the stream to its natural state is going to help with the sedimentation problem, I think that's a big advantage and is something we really should be looking at. The other thing I would say is, yes, you could dress it up, but I don't think having a culvert with, I don't know, fancy stonework on the sides is really going to improve it that much aesthetically. I think a bridge would enhance the view, and I agree with Steve that this is sort of our gateway to the park, to the trails. So I don't know if anyone else has another thought about that. You're muted, David, if you're talking.
One of the things that I heard you and Steve say at our meeting before was that by improving the flow of the stream and taking out some of the sediment, it would help take out some of the sediment in the canoe livery area. And we've spent a lot of money improving the concrete walkway down there so that people have better access to it. And it just seems that we ought to continue that investment to make the canoe and kayak area more user friendly. And that's one of the things that I liked about last week.
So I guess my follow-up question would be, do we have a consensus to take that option off the table? And then there's some other options that may be really cost prohibitive. So I'm just wondering if we can narrow down the options that we want to consider and then discuss those, the pros and cons.
I think that would be an appropriate way to proceed on this. And I guess I will invite people to give their input as to which option should be off the table. And I'll share my thoughts, but I'd like to hear from others first.
So one of the things that I'm muted again.
No, we can hear you. Now you're muted again.
I'm not able to read this
There
properly.
you go. You're good.
One of the things that I liked, but then thought of the downside to was I really liked the idea of the railroad car, flat car. And as I understood it, it was a fairly inexpensive compared to the other ones. But the problem, I think, is that it has a lot of wooden components to it. And I think if we're going to invest in having this done, having 50 years of use is a lot better than having one that has wood in it that would rot out at some stage of the game and us have to fix again, is a factor I think we ought to think about.
I also wondered if that option would require more annual maintenance, or at least occasional maintenance with painting the rails or whatever might be involved. Steve, do you have a comment on that?
Most of those flat rail cars that we looked into were entirely steel, so there weren't really any wooden components of those flat rail cars. So I'm not sure that the deterioration is a huge issue, but there certainly is probably a more intensive and more frequent maintenance period with those than there are some of these other options.
So would
There's
you,
also- I'm sorry. There's also quite a bit of more custom fabrication in terms of handrails and really taking that flat rail car, that blank slate, if you will, and turning it into something that aesthetically looks pleasing to the city.
what about the steel option, Steve? And what additional costs might be involved in installing that is not on your chart?
Well, I don't want to, I don't want to show all of my biases to the committee. I mean, I really had liked for the committee to come to their own conclusions, but as I kind of hinted to, I think in the presentation last week, the steel has a lot of advantages, both initial cost, um, especially with the weathered steel option, the rust colored finish on that bridge. It really is kind of the best of all worlds in terms of strength, appearance, ease of installation. So it checks a lot of boxes in terms of things that are good for that choice.
Steve, for that option, how much money are you talking about total, soup to nuts?
Don't have that cost comparison pulled up in front of me, and I should. It'll give me just 2 seconds to get there. So the steel bridge, and again, this is assuming a fully installed product, and it does, all of these final costs do have some level of assumptions with them. When these vendors gave us quotes, they were all pretty careful to say, we're giving you this information based on the information you've given us, and it's preliminary, but the steel installed price we think is somewhere in the $55,000 to $63,000 range, and there was some a little bit of difference in a couple of different vendors we talked to. So if we were to arrive at steel as our choice product, we would probably want to do some more shopping with different vendors and make sure we get both the style and do the best we can in terms of pricing on those structures.
But do I understand correctly that once installed, it would require very little maintenance?
That's correct.
That steel is what, Corten? stuff that rusts and it coats itself.
Tried to.
Correct,
What's
yeah.
that? Yeah. I want to give my opinion right now. We are probably in a once in a lifetime financial situation. We've received $630,000 of ARPA money from the federal government. We'll get another 630 for a total of about $1.3 million next June. We recently got some publication from the Treasury Department loosening up the rules about what we can spend it on, that the bottom line now is that we can spend it on practically anything, up to $10 million, which of course we're not going to be that high. So the point is that if you're going to spend $50,000 on a bridge, now is the time to do it.
I couldn't agree more.
They want us to spend the
Well,
money.
we also have a 10-year anniversary of the trails, and what a nice anniversary present to give the city than to open up the gateway even more attractively.
They want us to spend the money because two things. One, the recent issue of the final rules that just came out, as I said, basically tells us now for the first time that we can spend it on anything that is a valid governmental project. And the other thing is that if we don't spend the money, then in a couple of years, we have to give it back. So that tells me they want us to spend the money.
It's federal money too.
It's federal
Yeah,
money. It's
that's
not
right.
coming from
Right.
the residents of Bridgepoint or Sutherland or anything like that. It's coming from the United States Treasury, whereas they simply print the money.
So here's a question for you, Mr. Mayor. If we decided on an option now, I mean, we don't have any more money in the parks budget to do the project this year, but would we be able to?
We can fix that. We
Okay,
could fix that if we decided to, if the council decided to. We're going to do some fixing of the budget between now and the end of the fiscal year. On the other hand, we already have some ideas about how we want to spend what we've got in the bank, the 630, get another 630 in June. So you might want to put it in next year's budget.
Hey, Steve, one question on the steel. Our business uses a lot of steel and the price run-ups have been unbelievable. I had parts a year ago, I was paying $4 a piece for that went to 17. And so all through the industry, increases of, doubling or even tripling. I don't know what your budget numbers are, but odds are it has gone through the ceiling. More recently, it appears to have peaked. Don't see it going up much more, but steel has been a very hot commodity these last 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, absolutely agree. These quotes were obtained several months ago. So we would have to get new quotes from all of these vendors. And again, once we decide on a particular product, I think we want to spend some time making sure that we got a good selection of vendors and make sure that we settled on a product and a manufacturer that we were satisfied with, both in terms of price, in terms of delivery time and installation time.
So Steve, what is the time period from us giving you the green light on whatever option we choose to having it delivered, and how long does it take to install it?
Well, that also varies from vendor to vendor, David. For instance, with one of the steel vendors, True North Steel, I think they had, at least in their literature that they shared with us, which I think is in the back end of this report, I think that they were looking at order to installation time, something inside 3 months.
Now, of course, the other thing that we talked about briefly at our last meeting is that we also need to get the permitting done. We obviously would not be able to commit to a product until we've got approval from city council. So I'm not sure where that whole timeline goes. But I'm wondering if we should get back to Carolyn's point and talk about, are we at the point to select a product or at least narrow it down? To my mind, concrete's just too expensive. Fiberglass, at least the current product, is not really wide enough. I don't think we want to go with timber or the railroad cars because of the maintenance issues there. So I guess I'm saying my vote would be for the steel. And I
I
guess I'd like to know what other people feel.
I agree with that.
And well, steel will be also the longest, long term. It'll be the cheapest long term. The wear you get out of it, the lack of maintenance and all of that. It'll be engineered to fit the spot we want. I think it's the ideal choice from where I sit.
I think you've made a decision.
Sounds like it.
So then we need to think about what are the next steps? Do we, I don't know how much more work. Steve obviously will need to go back to the vendors and that sort of thing. And I don't know if there's still money in the budget for fees. I know we've done a partial payment. I don't think we paid you all of the consulting contract yet. So maybe we need to kind of figure out where we are at that. And then what we think needs to be done preliminarily before we're really at the point of asking city council for budget to purchase something.
What needs to be done preliminarily?
Well, I think we need to nail down the actual cost, because, and Steve had mentioned checking with other vendors to really know what the cost projection would be,
Well, that
To-
wouldn't take long.
to Lynn's point.
No, I do think there's one other issue we probably ought to talk about before we finalize on the steel. There were a couple of different variations of the truss designs that we shared in our report. I think the two most common being what they call a Pratt truss. And then there was a bowstring truss, which had a much different visual effect. And I didn't know if the committee had any thoughts about a preference on either of those.
I loved the bowstring one, but I thought that maybe it was too fancy for the park.
Was what?
We didn't
I
hear you.
loved the bowstring one, which comes up and down like I don't know, half a circle. I think it was very aesthetically attractive, but I'm wondering if it's too fancy for a rural woodsy park. That's just my thought.
Any other opinions on that?
Yeah, I think you ought to get fancy.
Yeah, I agree with the mayor.
Steve, is the bowstring design generally more expensive?
It is slightly more expensive, but aesthetically, I think it's much more pleasing than the Pratt truss is. I think it's $4,000 more for the bridge itself.
So I think maybe
Okay.
we're for aesthetics.
So I think what we do is next time we get the council together on what we're gonna do budget-wise, we plug that in and see if anybody salutes it.
That sounds good.
So just Steve can get us the total number for our use to propose this and see what happens.
I think that sounds like a good way forward.
Person to do it, it's fine.
And Given that this is the only agenda item, is everyone satisfied with the direction we're proposing? And
I
does
am.
it-
Yes,
Given the fact that we have people in the community, well, that have, shall I say, varying views about parks matters, is this something that I should put out there in a newsletter, letting the community know what's going on?
I think that would be a good
Couldn't
idea.
hurt.
I do too.
I think the community likes your updates that you give, Mayor.
I mean, they like the fact that I give them, or they like what's in them?
Both.
Sometimes both.
I'll have one coming out in about a week. And I'll try to put this in there. I might need a little help on the substance of exactly what the Parks Committee is doing and why.
Okay,
And who volunteers to help me with that?
I'd be happy to do that.
Good. I was hoping you would. All right. We'll be
Let
in
me know if
touch
you need
then.
anything, Linda.
I'm sorry.
Just let me know if you need anything from me.
I will certainly do that. So
I've been in meetings all day. Started out with some of you, not very many, this morning with a meeting about the, nice shot, about the meeting about the US 42 safety study. That meeting lasted for 2.5 hours. And unlike this meeting, when I can clearly hear everybody, in that meeting, it sounded like they were all mumbling in a cave. And I couldn't make out most of what they were saying. So as I told Ron, that was 2.5 hours I won't get back. Then again, at 2:00, there was a forestation board meeting. And that was the usual happy situation. So this is the high point of my day right here.
well, thank you. And with that, I think we're ready to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for participating.
thank you, Linda.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Linda.
everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Steve.
Linda. Thanks,
Appreciate it.
everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.